There's a little girl sitting alone in a dying diner on the edge of a Nevada nowhere, and she's holding a stuffed rabbit so tight her knuckles have gone white. She hasn't touched her cocoa. It went cold an hour ago. And the man in the booth across from her, the one with the bourbon breath and the wandering hands, he just stood up. Nobody in that diner moved to stop him. Nobody except the man who just walked through the door. Leather jacket, road dust, a face that looked like it had already survived the end of the world once and hadn't decided yet whether that was a good thing. What happens next will change everything. Stay with me until the end, friends, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. Hit that like button. Let's ride. The rain had been falling since Tonopah. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that rolled in with thunder and made people feel something cinematic about their lives. This was the other kind. Thin, relentless, cold as a county coroner's handshake. It came sideways off the high desert and found every gap in every collar and turned the asphalt into black glass that didn't care who it killed. Graves Mercer had been riding through it for 3 hours. He didn't stop for comfort. He didn't stop for food. He stopped because the rear tire on his 2009 Road King had started pulling fractionally left after the last stretch of washboard highway outside of Beatty, and a man who'd survived 2 deployments in one very bad year in a Nevada state courtroom did not ignore the small warnings. Small warnings were how you made it to 46. The men who ignored small warnings were the ones who didn't. The diner appeared out of the rain like something a tired god had misplaced. A low, flat-roofed structure with a hand-painted sign that read, Della's in red letters that had mostly bled down into orange. 2 windows lit from inside. A gravel lot. One truck parked at an angle that suggested the driver had arrived already impaired. A string of dead Christmas lights along the roofline that nobody had taken down, probably because nobody remembered they were there anymore. Graves pulled in, killed the engine, and sat for a moment with the rain tapping against his helmet. The tire would hold another 60 miles if he was careful. He wasn't in a hurry. He was never in a hurry anymore. And he'd stopped pretending that quality was a virtue about 2 years ago. It was just what happened when you ran out of destinations. He pulled off his helmet, hung it on the handlebar, and walked inside. The bell above the door announced him and then went quiet. There were 4 people in the diner. A woman behind the counter in her late 50s with the practiced stillness of someone who had learned to make herself small in the presence of certain kinds of men. A trucker at the far end of the counter, face down in a plate of eggs, already somewhere else. A man in a booth by the window, booth closest to the door, with a bourbon glass and the particular loose quality of someone on his 3rd or 4th drink of an evening that had started early. And in the booth directly across from the drunk man, separated by the narrow aisle between the 2 rows of tables, a child. 8 years old, maybe 9. Small in the way children are small when they've been carrying grown-up weight for a while. Dark hair that hadn't been brushed recently, a jacket 2 sizes too large that she'd pulled around herself like a cocoon, and in her arms, held against her chest with both hands, a stuffed rabbit, gray, worn, one ear slightly longer than the other, that she was gripping with the kind of focused desperation that people usually reserve for the last solid thing they have left. There was a mug of cocoa in front of her, stone cold, untouched. She was watching the drunk man the way a rabbit watches something it can't outrun. Graves took a stool at the counter. The woman, her name tag said Della, which answered one question, moved toward him with the reflexive politeness of someone whose livelihood depended on it, but her eyes kept cutting sideways to the booth with the child. Coffee, Graves said. She poured it without a word. He watched the drunk man in the window's reflection. The man was leaning forward now, elbows on the table, his eyes on the girl in the way that certain men had eyes on certain things they'd already decided were theirs to take. He said something low. Graves couldn't hear the words. He didn't need to. The child's grip on the rabbit tightened. The counter woman set down Graves's coffee and then found something to do at the far end of the counter. The trucker didn't look up from his eggs. Nobody moved. Graves drank his coffee. He set the mug down. He turned on the stool. The drunk man had stood up. He was crossing the aisle with the slow, tilting confidence of someone who believed the world was still organized in his favor. He put one hand on the back of the girl's booth, leaning over her, and said something that made the color drain from her face. Graves was already standing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He crossed the 7 feet of linoleum between the stool and the booth in 3 steps, and he put himself between the drunk man and the child with the simple, immovable certainty of a man who had been trained to hold ground and had nothing left to lose by holding it here. The drunk man looked up. He took in the leather jacket, the size, the face. Whatever he read there made some animal part of his brain start sending urgent signals to the rest of him. "She's with me," Graves said. 2 words. Flat as the Nevada landscape outside. The kind of voice that had no weather in it at all. The drunk man opened his mouth, recalibrated, closed it. He picked up his glass from the booth. He walked back to his own seat, sat down, and stared at the table with the studied blankness of a man pretending he'd made a choice rather than had one made for him. Graves didn't watch him go. He turned to the girl. She was staring up at him. Those eyes, dark, exhausted, measuring him with a precision that no 8-year-old should have developed, moved across his face like she was running some internal checklist that had been assembled under difficult conditions. He pulled out the bench across from her and sat down, not looming, just present. "You okay?" he said. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the rabbit in her hands, then back at him, then at the patch on his jacket, the Black Ash Brotherhood crest, a burning winged skull above crossed pistons, Nevada rocker underneath. "My mom told me something," the girl said. Her voice was small, but it wasn't a child's voice in the way that most children's voices were. There was something older living inside it, something that had learned to be careful. "What did she tell you?" "She said if I was ever alone and scared, I should find a biker." She swallowed. "She said they protect people that nobody else will protect." Graves looked at her for a long time. Rain hit the window behind her head. The Christmas lights outside blinked twice and went dark. "Where's your mom?" he said. The girl's jaw tightened, one small, precise muscle movement that was trying very hard to be brave. "I don't know," she said. "She told me to stay here and wait. That was 2 days ago." The coffee at the counter had gone cold by the time Graves finished the next question. "What's your name?" "Lila." "Lila what?" "Rowan." She paused. Lila Rowan. He made a note of that and filed it in the part of his mind where important things went when he needed both hands free. He looked at the rabbit again. Something about the way she was holding it snagged on something. The grip was wrong. She wasn't holding it the way children hold beloved things, soft and unconscious. She was holding it the way you hold something you've been told to protect. "What's in the rabbit, Lila?" She went very still. Outside, the rain intensified. The truck in the lot hadn't moved. The drunk man in the booth by the window was staring at his phone now, scrolling with the mechanical vacancy of someone who had been told to wait and was waiting. "He's not drunk," Lila said quietly. She nodded almost imperceptibly toward the booth by the window. "He's been on his phone since I got here. He has an earpiece. I've seen it twice." Graves did not look at the booth. He looked at Lila. 8 years old, hiding in a diner, clocking surveillance. He kept his voice level. "How do you know he's watching you?" "Because 3 different cars have slowed down in the parking lot in the last hour, and he texted every time one did." She met Graves's eyes. "My mom taught me to notice things." The drunk man in the booth stood up, pulled on his jacket with the 2 quick movements of someone who'd received a signal, and walked out of the diner without paying for his drink. The bell above the door rang and went quiet. Graves was on his feet in 2 seconds. He went to the window. The man was in the parking lot, standing at the rear of the angled truck, talking into a phone. Not making a call. Reporting. Graves turned back. Della behind the counter had gone pale. The trucker was eating his eggs. He went back to Lila and crouched to her eye level. "We need to leave," he said. "Right now. Are you going to come with me?" She looked at him, that measuring look again, running whatever internal protocol she had. Then she said, "There's a flash drive inside the rabbit. My mom sewed it in. She said if something happened to her, I had to make sure the right person got it." She paused. "She said I'd know the right person." "How would you know?" Lila looked at his patch again, at the burning skull, at the road-worn leather and the hands that had put themselves between her and something ugly without being asked. "Because they'd already have done it," she said. "Before I asked them to, Walt." He didn't take the highway. He took the access road behind the diner, a two-lane strip of cracked asphalt that ran parallel to Route 95 through scrub brush and silence, and he kept the bike at 60 with Lila behind him, her small arms around his waist and the rabbit tucked inside her jacket. He'd borrowed a helmet from Della. The woman had pressed it into his hands without a word, her expression saying everything she wasn't going to say out loud. And Lila wore it with her chin down, her face turned into the back of his jacket. He had 6 contacts in his phone. He called one. It rang 4 times, which was unusual. Most things that rang 4 times were going to voicemail. "It's 2 in the morning," said a voice like gravel rolling down a mountain. "Boone," Graves said. "I've got a situation." A pause. The sound of something being set down on a hard surface. Defined situation. "Found a kid. 8 years old, alone in a diner outside Beatty. Mother's been missing 2 days. She's carrying something somebody doesn't want her to have, and there's at least one watcher already positioned." He paused. "The kid made the tale before I did, Boone." A longer silence. "Bring her in," Boone said, and then, before he hung up, "Don't use the main road." Graves already wasn't. Shut. The Black Ash Brotherhood compound sat at the end of a dirt road 11 miles outside of Caliente, Nevada. A collection of converted outbuildings, a main hall that had once been a machine shop, and a perimeter fence that looked casual until you noticed the camera placements and understood it was anything but. In the daylight, it looked like a working property that had seen better decades. In the dark, with rain coming off the hills and the yard lights throwing orange cones across wet gravel, it looked like exactly what it was, a place built by men who understood the value of walls. There were 4 bikes outside when Graves pulled in. More inside the barn, he knew. The Brotherhood had 17 active members, half of them veterans of something. 2 wars, 1 era of shadow operations, 1 period of institutional neglect that the civilian population had mostly forgotten, and the men who lived through it had not. They ranged in age from 34 to 61. They were mechanics and welders, and 1 former emergency room nurse who didn't talk about that period of his life unless he absolutely had to. They were not saints. They carried histories that would not survive polite company. But they operated by a code that had been written in the specific language of men who had seen what happened when nobody held the line. Boone Harlan was standing in the doorway of the main hall when Graves pulled up. He was 61 years old and built like the idea of a mountain rather than an actual one. Not enormous, but substantial in a way that had nothing to do with size. White hair, cut short, a beard that had stopped being a style choice around the same time it became a fact. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm and the president's patch on the leather vest over it, and he was looking at the child climbing off the back of Graves's bike with an expression that Graves had learned over 14 years to translate accurately. It wasn't irritation, it was something closer to recognition. Lila stood in the rain and looked up at Boone Harlan without flinching. "You're the president," she said. Boone looked at Graves. Graves gave him nothing. "What makes you say that?" Boone said. "Because he called you first," Lila said, "and you came outside." Boone made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else, and he stepped back from the doorway and held it open. "Come inside," he said, "before you both drown." They sat in the main hall around the long table that had served as everything from a meeting room to a dining table to a surgical surface on 2 occasions Graves tried not to think about. The fluorescent lights overhead were supplemented by a hanging shop light that Decker, the former ER nurse, a lean 40-year-old with arms full of faded ink, had rigged up after the 3rd light fixture burned out, and nobody had gotten around to replacing it. It gave the room the feeling of a place where serious things were discussed seriously, which was not entirely inaccurate. Lila sat in the chair nearest the door. She kept the rabbit in her lap. She'd accepted a cup of hot cocoa from Teeks, a barrel-chested 53-year-old who served as the club's de facto cook and was capable of enormous tenderness in the specific way that large, violent men sometimes are. And she was drinking it with both hands wrapped around the mug, watching the room. There were 6 of them present: Graves, Boone, Decker, Teeks. A quiet man they called Moss, who had very little to say about most things and very precise things to say about the rest. And Ellis, the club's youngest full patch at 34, who had stationed himself near the back door with the kind of casual positioning that wasn't casual. "Tell me about your mother," Boone said to Lila. Lila set her cocoa down. She thought for a moment, selecting what to share the way someone selects tools for a specific job. "Her name is Naomi Rowan. She worked for a company called Meridian Developmental Services. She said she was a case manager, but about 6 months ago she stopped telling me about work." Lila paused. "She started keeping her computer in her car." Boone looked at Graves. Graves said nothing. "She started making me memorize things," Lila continued. "Phone numbers, addresses. What to do if she didn't come back. She made me practice." A beat. "She sewed the flash drive into Mr. Buttons 3 weeks ago. She said it was the most important thing in the world and that I was the only person she could trust to carry it." Silence in the room. The rain hammered the metal roof. "Why couldn't she carry it herself?" Moss said. His first words of the evening. Lila looked at him steadily. "Because she said whoever was watching her didn't know about me yet, and she wanted it to stay that way as long as possible." She reached into her jacket and placed Mr. Buttons on the table. The rabbit sat there under the shop light, one ear cocked sideways, seams along the belly carefully reinforced. Graves could see now where the stitching was different, tighter, more purposeful than the factory work on the rest of the toy. "Can I have a pair of scissors?" Lila said. Teeks produced a multi-tool. Lila took it, selected the blade, and opened it with a practiced ease that made every man in the room register something they didn't say out loud. She opened a seam along the inside of Mr. Button's left ear, reached in, and withdrew a flash drive no larger than her thumbnail. She set it on the table next to the rabbit. Nobody moved. "She said it would explain everything," Lila said. "She said the people who are looking for it are the same people who are supposed to protect kids." She looked at the flash drive. "She said that was the worst part. What was on the flash drive took 40 minutes to process and changed the quality of the air in the room before the first document finished loading. Moss had a laptop. He wasn't the club's technology specialist. That would have been Rains, who wasn't present. But he knew enough to run the drive through an isolated machine, offline, before opening anything. Standard caution. The kind of caution that becomes habit when you've spent years operating in environments where trust was an asset you rationed carefully. The drive contained 4 folders. The first was a collection of 847 documents, case files, intake forms, placement records, interagency memos, drawn from the Nevada Department of Child and Family Services, the Caliente County Juvenile Court, and something called the Meridian Developmental Services Database. The second folder held photographs. The third held financial records. The fourth held something labeled simply audio and had not been opened yet. They started with the documents because documents were facts, and facts were the foundation of decisions. By the time they'd gone through the first 47 files, the room was very quiet. Children. Names, ages, case numbers, placement histories. Dozens of them. Kids who had entered the Nevada foster care system through normal channels, parental abandonment, neglect, abuse, and been assigned to Meridian Developmental Services as a placement coordinator. Kids whose files showed routine placements, regular check-ins, documented progress. Kids who, when Naomi Rowan had cross-referenced them against school enrollment records and follow-up case notes, simply stopped appearing in any subsequent documentation. Not closed files, not aged-out files, not transferred files, gone files. Entries that terminated in the system with administrative language that meant nothing and confirmed nothing and could not be questioned by anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Naomi Rowan had apparently known what she was looking at. Her annotation layer on the documents was methodical, careful, and written in the specific voice of someone who understood that what they were building had to be unimpeachable because the people they were building it against controlled the mechanisms of impeachment. She had cross-referenced placement dates against financial transfer records between Meridian and 3 shell companies. She had mapped the county judge who approved the placements, a man named Wallace Prentice, 18 years on the family court bench, against a pattern of accelerated hearings and waived review periods. She had documented a deputy named Carver, who appeared at intake for every child that subsequently vanished, always documented as a routine transport officer, always clocking out of the system at the same coordinates 40 miles outside of Caliente. 43 children over 4 years, 43 children who were somewhere in the world right now, or weren't. The audio folder contained 31 recordings. Naomi Rowan's voice, low and controlled, naming names, describing meetings, narrating events with dates and times and specifics. The recordings were made in a moving vehicle. You could hear traffic, acceleration, the intermittent sound of a turn signal. A woman driving and documenting, probably because sitting still felt too exposed. In the last recording, dated 11 days ago, her voice changed pitch in a way that had nothing to do with the audio quality. If you're hearing this and I'm not there, then they found out. They've known about the investigation for at least 2 weeks. I made a mistake. I used a work terminal to access the Meridian server one extra time, and I think that triggered something. I don't know how much time I have. Lila is safe. She doesn't know everything, but she knows enough to find the right person. I told her to trust the Black Ash Brotherhood. I know how that sounds. I did my research. I know what Boone Harlan walked away from to build something different out there in the desert. I know what Graves Mercer lost. I know what men look like when they've decided what they're willing to die for. A pause on the recording. Road sounds, something that might have been a breath held too long and then released. Please find my daughter, and please don't let them make any more children disappear. The recording ended. Nobody in the room spoke. Lila was looking at the laptop screen. Her face was very still. She'd heard her mother's voice before any of them could have stopped her, and whatever that had cost her was something she was managing internally with a discipline that had no business existing in an 8-year-old's body. Boone reached across the table and closed the laptop. He looked at Graves for a long time, then at the rest of the room. "We vote in the morning," he said. "What are we voting on?" Ellis said from the back. Boone's voice was even. "Whether we go in or walk away." "Is walking away actually on the table?" Decker said. Boone didn't answer that. He stood up, pushing his chair back with a sound like a punctuation mark. "Get her a bed," he said, nodding toward Lila. "Get everybody else up. Nobody sleeps yet." He walked out toward the back of the hall, through the door that led to his office. The door didn't close hard. It closed deliberately, which was worse. Graves looked at Lila. She was still looking at where the laptop had been. "She's alive," Graves said. Not because he knew. Because the alternative wasn't something he was going to put in the air of this room tonight. Lila looked at him. That measuring look. Running the calculation. "She made the recording 11 days ago," Lila said, "and she told me to come here 2 days ago. That means she had 9 days in between." She looked down at Mr. Buttons on the table. She would have tried to run. She would have tried everything before she'd have sent me alone. Graves said nothing. "Which means whatever they did to her," Lila continued, "they did it recently." The shop light hummed overhead. Rain ticked against the metal roof in irregular rhythm. Graves picked up Mr. Buttons and handed the rabbit back to her. "Try to sleep," he said. She took the rabbit. She didn't argue, which wasn't the same as agreeing. Teeks put her in the back bunk room that had been used at various points for injured riders, for arguments that needed to be had away from the main hall, and once for a Caliente County Sheriff's deputy who'd needed to sleep somewhere that wasn't his house for a period of about 6 weeks during a complicated domestic situation. The room had a narrow bunk, a wool blanket, and a small window that looked out at the back fence. It smelled like motor oil and old wood and very faintly of the cedar sachets that Teeks kept in strategic locations around the compound because he'd read somewhere that cedar kept insects out and had taken this information extremely seriously. Lila climbed into the bunk without being told. She put Mr. Buttons against the wall beside her head. She pulled the blanket up to her chin. Teeks stood in the doorway, his enormous frame filling it completely, holding a second cup of cocoa he'd brought as an afterthought. "You need anything else?" he said. "Is there going to be a vote?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah." "What happens if it goes the wrong way?" Teeks considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "It won't," he said. "How do you know?" He set the second cocoa on the floor beside the bunk where she could reach it. He reached up and switched off the overhead light, leaving just the ambient glow from the yard lights through the small window. "Because Graves brought you here," he said, "and Graves doesn't bring things here that he isn't ready to die for." He pulled the door mostly closed and left her in the near dark. Through the thin wall, she could hear the sound of voices assembling in the main hall. Low, serious, the sound of men preparing to make a decision that had weight to it. She held Mister, buttons against her chest, and stared at the ceiling. She did not sleep. In the main hall, they'd pulled in everyone who was on the compound. 17 men around the table and along the walls, in various states of being roused from sleep. Decker had made a pot of coffee that was now half gone. Moss had printed the documents. The compound had an offline printer that nobody used for anything traceable, and the pages were spread across the table in organized piles. Rains, who had arrived 10 minutes ago and immediately taken the laptop back, was running the drive through a deeper analysis, cross-referencing metadata against publicly available records. He was 29 and had the focused intensity of someone for whom information was not abstract. It was tactical. Financial transfers traced to 3 shell companies, he said, without looking up from the screen. All 3 are registered in Delaware. One of them has a partial ownership structure that leads back to a Nevada state senator's blind trust. Not direct, 2 layers out. He paused. But it's there. Who's the senator? Boone said. Name is Marcus Holt. He's been on the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee for 6 years. Rains paused again. He's the one who appointed Wallace Prentice to the family court. The room processed this. They've already got our photographs, said a man named Cullen, the club's oldest member at 61, who had the kind of stillness that comes from having survived things that didn't leave marks you could see. He was holding a printout from the drive, the folder Graves hadn't mentioned yet. There are surveillance photographs of this compound in the documentation, 12 of them, aerial and ground level. 3 of them show Graves's bike, 2 show the front gate. He set the page on the table. They're time-stamped last Thursday. But the room temperature dropped by no measurable degree and several subjective ones. They knew about us before tonight, Graves said. They knew about us before Naomi Rowan sent the girl here, Cullen said, which means she was already being watched when she told the kid to run. He looked at Graves. They let her go. They let the kid walk into the diner. They used her as a delivery mechanism, Rains said. They couldn't take the rabbit without knowing if there were copies. So they let the kid move, tracked where she went, and now they know exactly where the drive is. They know it's here, Moss said. They knew it was coming here, Cullen said, which is a different problem. Boone stood at the head of the table with his hands flat on the surface. He looked at the photographs. He looked at the financial records. He looked at the list of 43 missing children's names that Moss had arranged alphabetically on a single page. We vote, Boone said. Standard procedure. We vote to engage or to stand down. If we engage, we go all the way. No half measures, no distance. If we stand down, we package the drive and find a route to someone with federal jurisdiction who isn't on Holt's radar. Either way, we're in motion before dawn. Third option, said a voice from the far wall. Everyone looked at the man who'd spoken. His name was Hatch, 55, former Army combat controller, the kind of man who didn't speak in meetings unless he had something that changed the geometry of the situation. Third option is we do both. We get the drive to a federal contact, but we don't wait to see what happens. We go find the facility ourselves. He looked at the table. Because federal timelines aren't child timelines. Those kids have been wherever they are for months, some of them for years. He paused. A federal investigation that takes 6 months is a federal investigation that takes 6 months. And every one of those kids is still in the ground. The phrase fell on the room like a stone into still water, still in the ground. Nobody misunderstood what he meant. Boone looked at Hatch for a long moment. Then he looked at the list of 43 names. We vote, he said, all in favor of engaging full resource commitment, no standing down once we're in motion. Raise your hand. 16 hands went up before he finished the sentence. Boone raised his own. 17. Unanimous. The vote took 11 seconds. What came after was the controlled, purposeful chaos of men who had done this before. Not this specifically, but the general category of preparing to do something that cannot be undone and must therefore be done correctly. Weapons were inventoried. Equipment was pulled from locked storage. Rains worked the digital side, building a picture of the area in a 40-mile radius around the coordinates Naomi Rowan had documented for Deputy Carver's last known position. Desert, mostly, flat and hard and navigable by anyone who knew the roads and fatal to anyone who didn't. Graves stood at the window of the main hall and watched the yard. The rain had slowed, just barely. The sky to the east had a faint quality of pre-dawn gray, the kind that promised nothing except that night was ending. Behind him, Boone came to stand at his shoulder. They'd known each other for 14 years. They'd built the brotherhood together, in the specific sense that Graves had been there for the beginning. The first 3 members, the first clubhouse, the first articulation of what they were going to be and what they were never going to become. There were things between them that didn't need to be said, and things that had never been said, and both categories were significant. She named us specifically, Graves said. Naomi Rowan. She knew our name. I heard the recording, Boone said. She said she did her research. Graves looked at the fence line. She knew about you. She knew what you walked away from. Boone said nothing. What did she know? Graves said. A long pause, the kind that has history in it. My son did a tour in the same theater I did, Boone said. Different unit. He came back different. He stopped. He was killed 8 months ago, ruled a suicide. I've never believed that, and I've never been able to prove otherwise. His voice was flat and controlled in the way of someone who has said these words before, privately, and learned to say them without breaking. If there's a chance that the machine that killed those kids is the same machine that killed my son, he stopped again. Then this isn't just about Lila Rowan. Graves turned to look at him. Boone's face was entirely still. It was never going to be just about one child, Graves said. No, Boone said. It was always going to be about all of them. From the back of the compound, through the thin walls, came a sound. Small, distinct. The sound of boots on a wooden floor. Light footsteps. Moving from the bunk room toward the main hall. Both men turned. Lila Rowan was standing in the doorway with Mr. Buttons under her arm and her dark eyes moving across the room. The weapons laid out on the table, the maps on the wall, the men in various states of preparation. With the same precise, measuring quality, she'd turned on everything else. You voted yes, she said. It wasn't a question. Go back to bed, Graves said. There are things I didn't tell you, she said. The room went quiet. Lila, my mom gave me an address, she said. She made me memorize it. She said never write it down, never say it out loud unless I was completely sure. She looked at Graves, then at Boone, then back at Graves. I'm completely sure. She recited a set of GPS coordinates. Rains had his laptop open before she finished. He looked at the screen. He looked up. That's 43 miles southeast, he said. It's registered as an abandoned mineral extraction site. He typed something. But the satellite imagery from 14 months ago shows construction. Significant construction. He turned the laptop so the room could see. Underground. The word hung in the fluorescent light. The room looked at the satellite image, at the coordinates, at the child standing in the doorway in her oversized jacket, holding a one-eared rabbit, and watching them with eyes that had already calculated what came next and were waiting to see if the adults in the room had caught up. Graves crossed to the doorway. He crouched to her eye level. How long have you been holding on to that? He said. Lila looked at him. Something behind her eyes, some last barrier she'd been maintaining since the diner, since before the diner, since however long she'd been carrying this alone, shifted. Since my mom didn't come back, she said. Outside, the rain had stopped. In the sudden silence somewhere beyond the fence line, on the dark road that ran along the edge of the compound, a pair of headlights appeared. Then a second pair. Then a third. They were stationary, parked, watching the gate. And they had not been there 60 seconds ago. Graves was at the window in 3 steps. 3 vehicles. Parked on the access road, engines off, headlights on. No movement, no doors opening, just the light, sitting there in the dark like a question that already knew the answer. Rains, he said. Already on it. Rains had pulled up the compound's external camera feed on his laptop. 4 angles. The vehicles were pickup trucks. Dark-colored, no distinguishing plates visible from the camera resolution. They've been on the road for at least 40 minutes. I'm checking back through the motion logs, he typed. They were there before Lila gave us the coordinates. That landed differently than the first version of this threat had landed. "They're not here because of what she told us," Moss said from the table. He was looking at the camera feed over Rains' shoulder. "They were already here." "They've been watching us set up," Cullen said. Boone hadn't moved from his position near the window. He was looking at the trucks with the particular quality of attention that very experienced men direct at things they are trying to understand completely before they decide what to do about them. "They're not moving," he said. "No," Graves said. "If they wanted to breach, they'd have come in already. We had 6 people awake, and the rest just roused." Boone turned from the window. "They want us to know they're there." "They want us nervous," Ellis said from the back. "They want us to run," Hatch said. "They spook us. We move the girl. They follow us to wherever we take her, and they take her somewhere that isn't a fortified compound with 17 armed men." He looked at Boone. "We stay put." "We stay put," Boone confirmed. He turned to the room. "Full watch rotation. Nobody goes outside the perimeter. Ellis, Cullen, main gate. Hatch, take the back fence. Everyone else stays available." He looked at Graves. "And get the girl back in the bunk room." Graves turned. Lila was still in the doorway. She had been watching the entire exchange with that unnerving stillness. She looked at the camera feed on Rains' laptop. She looked at the 3 sets of headlights. "They did the same thing outside our apartment," she said, "before my mom sent me away. A car parked on the street for 2 nights. She told me it meant we were running out of time." She looked at Graves. She was right. Nobody in the room said anything. "Bunk room," Graves said quietly. "Now." She went. She didn't argue, and the fact that she didn't argue was somehow more unsettling than if she had. Crutch. The truck stayed on the access road until 4:17 in the morning. Then the headlights went out, one at a time, and the road was dark. It didn't feel like a retreat. It felt like a decision being made somewhere else, by people who had more information than the Brotherhood currently did, and were comfortable enough in that advantage to be patient about how they used it. Graves didn't sleep. He sat at the table in the main hall with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and the printed pages from Naomi Rowan's drive spread in front of him, and he read everything twice. Not for information. He'd absorbed the information. He read it for architecture, for the shape of how it had been built, and by whom, and how long it had been standing. 43 children over 4 years. The earliest case was dated 51 months ago. A 7-year-old boy named Marcus Tillman, placed through Meridian after his mother's overdose, assigned to a foster family in the Henderson corridor. His file showed 2 routine check-ins, a positive developmental note, and then nothing. The file termination code was listed as administrative closure, reunification. But there was no reunification record. There was no follow-up family contact. There was no documentation of the biological mother having been contacted, despite her being alive and having completed a court-ordered treatment program 3 months after placement. Marcus Tillman would be 11 or 12 now, if he was still alive. Graves turned that thought over and put it somewhere he could function around it. He pulled the photograph folder next. The surveillance images of the compound were professional. Long lens, good equipment, multiple angles over multiple days. Whoever had taken them knew what they were doing and had the resources to do it without being noticed. But the photographs weren't the thing that caught him. The thing that caught him was one image in the financial records folder that Naomi Rowan had annotated with a single line. Cross-reference Boone Harlan, 2019. Graves looked at that annotation for a long time. He didn't open anything else. He closed the folder and sat with the coffee and the silence and the sound of the compound settling around him. Cullen's boots on gravel outside. Ellis's low voice checking in on the radio, the distant sound of the wind coming off the desert hills. Cross-reference Boone Harlan, 2019. He knew what 2019 was. He'd been there for the edges of it, though not the center. 2019 was when Boone's son, Damon, 26 at the time, had left the Brotherhood after an argument that Graves had never been given the full details of and had learned not to ask about. Damon had joined the Army Reserve, had deployed, had come back changed in the way that Boone had described, had died 8 months ago in a manner ruled a suicide. Graves sat with all of that, and the annotation, and the specific discomfort of knowing that Naomi Rowan had done her research and had flagged something she thought was relevant, and he hadn't yet found out what it was. He would have to ask Boone. That was a conversation with edges on it. Imos. Dawn arrived gray and windless. The desert looked scrubbed clean by the night's rain, the sage and the pale soil taking on a temporary sharpness that would burn off with the first real heat of morning. The compound stirred the way compounds stir, in increments, coffee first, then voices, then the gradual reassembly of people into something functional. Teeks was in the kitchen building a breakfast that no one had asked for but everyone needed. The smell of eggs and bacon moved through the main hall and did what food smells do in hard circumstances, which is remind people that they still have bodies and the bodies have requirements. Lila appeared at 7:15. She'd slept, Graves could tell, the specific quality of a face that had actually gone under versus one that had just lain still all night. She sat at the table and ate what Teeks put in front of her and didn't speak, and nobody spoke to her until she'd finished. It was the kind of collective instinct that surfaces in people who've spent time around trauma and learned to leave space for it. After she ate, she helped Teeks carry plates to the kitchen without being asked. Teeks looked at Graves over the top of her head. The look said several things that didn't require words. Graves drank his coffee. At 8 o'clock, Boone called a working session. Not a vote, a working session, which was what happened after the vote, when the decision was made and the question became how. They had 3 problems, in order of immediacy. The first was the facility. Raines had spent the night building a picture of the site from satellite imagery, geological survey records, and property registration documents. The surface was registered to a company called Redline Desert Holdings, incorporated in Wyoming, owned through a series of nested LLCs that eventually connected, 6 layers deep, to the same Delaware structures as the Meridian financial transfers. The geological surveys showed significant subsurface excavation consistent with the former mineral extraction cover story, but the construction timelines didn't match. The excavation evident in the satellite imagery was newer than the extraction registration, and the infrastructure, ventilation shafts, reinforced access roads, what appeared to be a generator building, was not standard mining infrastructure. It was standard detention infrastructure. Capacity estimates? Boone said. Raines hesitated. Based on the footprint and the ventilation configurations, somewhere between 30 and 60 individuals. He paused. If they're running it at capacity. The room sat with that. The second problem was external exposure. The surveillance photographs meant the Brotherhood was already visible to whoever was running this operation. That meant their movements, their communications, and their decision-making were potentially compromised. Raines had swept the compound's internal systems. No active intrusion, no known spyware, but analog surveillance was harder to sweep for, and the 3 trucks on the road last night were proof that someone had the manpower and the patience to watch them physically. We have to assume our phones are targeted, Raines said. Anything cellular is potentially monitored. Anything we do that creates a digital footprint between here and the facility needs to be treated as potentially visible. So we go dark, Hatch said. We go dark as of now, Boone confirmed. The third problem was Boone, though nobody in the room said that yet. Graves said it. There's something in the drive I need to ask you about, he said. Boone looked at him. The room's temperature shifted. Naomi Rowan flagged your name in the financial records. She wrote a cross-reference note, 2019. Graves kept his voice even. What happened in 2019 that she would have found in a financial document related to Meridian Developmental Services? Complete silence. The men in the room had the specific stillness of people who have just understood that something significant is about to happen and have decided to be very still while it does. Boone stood at the head of the table. He looked at Graves. His face was doing nothing that Graves could read. You found that last night, Boone said. Yeah. And you waited until now to ask. I waited until there were other people in the room, Graves said, because if the answer is what I'm worried it might be, the club needs to hear it. The silence stretched. Boone pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. He put his hands flat on the surface. He looked at the wood grain. In 2019, he said, Damon came to me. He'd found out about Meridian. Not the trafficking. He didn't know the full scope yet. He'd found out that Meridian was moving kids through the foster system into situations that didn't look right to him. He was doing reserve work at the time, had access to some county records through a liaison program. Boone paused. He brought it to me. He wanted the club to look into it. What did you tell him? Graves said. Boone was quiet for a beat that lasted longer than a breath. I told him it wasn't our business. The words were flat, dead on arrival. I told him we didn't get involved in county politics. I told him if he had real evidence, he should take it to the right authorities. The right authorities, Graves said. I know, Boone said. The right authorities are the people running this. I know. His voice hadn't changed in pitch or volume. It didn't need to. I sent my son to the people who killed him because I didn't want to get involved. He looked up. Not at Graves specifically. At the room. That's what Naomi Rowan found. That's what the cross-reference is. Damon made a report, through official channels. His name is in the Meridian incident log as a complainant. The complaint was received by Deputy Carver, logged and closed. He paused. 6 months later, Damon deployed. A year after that, he was dead. The room was absolutely still. Graves looked at his coffee mug. He looked at the wall. He didn't look at Boone because looking at Boone right now would be a specific kind of unkindness, and Boone had been carrying this alone for 8 months, and the least Graves could do was not make the carrying harder in the seconds immediately after it was put on the table. Okay, Graves said. That's all? Ellis said from the wall. His voice was not unkind, but it was young in the way that men who haven't yet had to carry the worst thing are young. That's all you've got? Ellis? Hatch said. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying, Graves said. He looked at Ellis. And it doesn't change the vote. It doesn't change anything except that now we understand what this actually is. He looked at Boone. Which is personal. Boone said nothing. Which means, Graves continued, that you can't be the one making the final call when we get there. Not on the person responsible. Not if Damon's death is connected. He held Boone's gaze. You know that. Boone looked at him for a long moment. The weight of the room was considerable. I know that, Boone said. Then we understand each other. We understand each other. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't forgiveness, because Graves wasn't the one who could offer that and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. It was just two men who had been through enough together to know that guilt was not a reason to stand down and was not a reason to lose focus, and that the best thing Boone Harlan could do for his dead son right now was stay functional and stay present and help get 43 missing children out of the ground. The planning took 4 hours. It was the kind of planning that happens when the men doing it have done versions of it before. Not identical, never identical, but close enough that the vocabulary was shared and the instincts were calibrated. Hatch ran point on the tactical approach. Rains built the communication structure. Graves worked the logistics. Fuel, routes, timing, extraction points. Teeks, who had been an army medic before he'd been anything else, inventoried the medical supplies with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew exactly what categories of need to anticipate. There was a conversation about Lila that needed to happen, and nobody wanted to start it. Graves started it. She can't be here when we move, he said. Where does she go? Decker said. I have a contact in Ely, woman named Carla Weiss. She's not connected to any of this. She's a retired school counselor. She's known me for 8 years. She's got a house with a fenced yard and a very large dog and no digital footprint worth speaking of. He looked at the table. Lila stays with Carla until this is done. You trust this person? Boone said. With a child, yes. He paused. Completely. Does the kid know? Teeks said. Not yet. Nobody spoke for a moment. She's not going to like it, Moss said. It was the most he'd said all morning. No, Graves said. She's not. He told her after lunch. They sat outside on the wooden steps at the back of the main hall. The sun was up properly now, the desert bleaching out to its midday colors, the cold of the night becoming a memory. Lila sat with her elbows on her knees and Mr. Buttons held loosely in both hands, listening to Graves explain Carla Weiss and Ely and the large dog and the fenced yard. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You're going to the facility, she said. Yes. To find my mom, among other things. She looked at the desert. What if she's not there? Then we find out where she is. What if... She stopped, started again. What if they already... We don't know that yet, Graves said. We don't act on what we don't know. She was quiet again. The wind moved through the sage in a dry whisper. I want to come, she said. I know. I could help. I know things about the facility that... Lila. His voice wasn't harsh. It was the voice of someone saying something that cost them something and was going to say it anyway. I made your mother a promise. She looked at him. On that flash drive, he said. She asked me to find you. I found you. Now I'm asking you to stay safe while I do the second part. He held her gaze. Don't make me break one to do the other. A long silence. She looked at Mr. Buttons. She turned the rabbit over in her hands once. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. The smallest word carrying the most weight. I need something from you first, she said. What? She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out to him. He unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn map, pencil, careful, precise for a child's hand. Coordinates labeled in the margins. Symbols for what appeared to be a main entrance, a secondary access point, and a third marking she'd labeled in her small printing, where Mom said the kids are. She described it to me, Lila said, the night before she sent me away. She said she didn't know if she'd be able to tell anyone else, so she told me. Everything she'd figured out about the layout. She looked at the map in his hands. She said the main entrance is a trap. They monitor it. The secondary access, the one on the east side. It's an old service road from the extraction days. It's not on any current map. She pointed to a marking on the paper. There. Graves looked at the map. He looked at her. You drew this from memory? She made me memorize it, Lila said. And then she made me draw it. And then she made me memorize the drawing. She met his eyes. She knew she was running out of time. She spent it on me. The weight of that sentence, what it contained, what it meant about a woman who had understood what was coming and had used her last hours of safety to arm her 8-year-old daughter with the only weapon available, sat between them in the Nevada sun. Graves folded the map carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Thank you, he said. Lila nodded. She stood up, brushed off her jeans, and walked back inside with Mr. Buttons under her arm and her chin level, and Graves watched her go and felt the specific weight of what it meant to be trusted by someone who had every reason not to trust anything anymore. He showed the map to Hatch and Rains 30 minutes later. Hatch studied it for 60 seconds without speaking, then looked up with an expression that was as close to surprised as Hatch's face got. She's right about the service road, Rains said, pulling up the geological survey on his laptop. It's here. It doesn't appear on any public map because it predates the current survey records. It runs east from County Road 847 to the original extraction site. If the facility is built on that footprint, this road goes directly to the secondary structure. He traced it with his finger. This is a back door. A back door they may not be watching as closely as the main approach, Hatch said. Or a back door they're counting on us not knowing about, Moss said from the doorway. Either way, it changes the approach geometry, Hatch said. Main force draws attention at the primary access. Secondary team comes in on the service road. He looked at Graves. How did she know all this? Her mother told her, Graves said. Nobody had anything to add to that. At 3 in the afternoon, Graves drove Lila to Ely. He took a roundabout route, 2 hours instead of 1, and varied his speed and checked his mirrors with the mechanical regularity of someone who had been trained to do it and had never fully stopped. Lila sat behind him on the bike and didn't speak, and the desert rolled past in its flat, indifferent way, and the sky was the specific shade of winter blue that exists only in the high desert and looks like something a painter made up. Carla Weiss was 62, silver-haired, and had the practical warmth of someone who had spent decades around frightened children and understood that warmth without practicality was just performance. She opened the door before Graves knocked, because she'd heard the bike, and she looked at Lila with an assessment that was so fast and so thorough that Lila clocked it and, in what Graves considered a significant indicator, did not flinch from it. "You must be Lila," Carla said. "Yes, ma'am." "Are you hungry?" "I ate." A pause. "Thank you." Carla looked at Graves over Lila's head. The look said, "She's in rough shape, but she's holding. I've got her." Graves gave her the abbreviated version of what she needed to know. Not everything, enough. And Carla listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that abbreviated meant important. "How long?" Carla said. "I don't know," Graves said honestly. Carla nodded. This was not her first time operating on incomplete information. Lila stood in Carla's hallway and held Mr. Buttons and looked at Graves with those eyes that measured everything. "You'll come back," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," he said, "with my mom." He looked at her. He thought about what it meant to make a promise to someone who had already had too many promises broken, and what it meant to withhold one. "I'm going to try," he said. "I'm not going to lie to you about what I can guarantee." A pause. "Okay," she said. "That's enough." He turned to leave. "Graves." He turned back. She was looking at him with something in her face that was past the measuring, past the calculation, something that had no protective layer left on it. "She was scared," Lila said, "when she sent me away. She was trying not to show it, but I could tell." She swallowed. "She's been scared for a long time. She kept going anyway." A beat. "She kept going anyway." He held that. "I know," he said. "She sounds like someone I'd want in my corner." Lila almost smiled. Almost. He left before she could see what that almost did to his face. He made it back to the compound by 7. The change in the yard was immediate and physical, the kind of atmospheric shift that happens in a space when men have been moving from preparation into readiness. Bikes lined up, gear staged, the low-frequency hum of focused purpose running through the whole compound like current through a wire. Boone was in the main hall with Hatch and Rains going over the final approach plan when Graves walked in. "She's settled?" Boone said. "She's settled? Then we're at full readiness." Boone looked at Rains. "Tell him." Rains turned the laptop. "I've been building a recipient list for the drive contents. People I can verify are outside Holt's political network. 2 are federal, 1 is investigative press, 1 is an attorney with an established record of taking on institutional corruption cases in this region." He looked at Graves. "Once we move, I'm sending it. All of it. Simultaneously. Not as leverage, as insurance. If we go in and something goes wrong, the information gets out regardless." "Timeline?" Graves said. "I send it the moment we breach the perimeter. There's no taking it back after that." Graves looked at Boone. Boone looked at Graves. "No taking it back," Graves said. "No taking it back," Boone confirmed. Graves pulled the folded map from his jacket and spread it on the table alongside Rains's satellite imagery. "Then let's talk about what we're riding into." They gathered around the table, all 17 of them, in the orange light of the shop lamp with the smell of coffee and leather and the cold desert air coming in under the door. Hatch walked through the approach. Rains walked through the communication blackout. Graves walked through the medical extraction points. Teeks didn't speak because Teeks didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew what his role was and trusted him to perform it. It went for 90 minutes. It was methodical and thorough, and at the end of it, the shape of the thing was clear. Not safe. It was never going to be safe. But clear. The difference between those two things was the difference between men who had survived difficult operations and men who hadn't. At 9:15, Boone called it. "We ride at 0200, he said. "Get your head right. Get your gear squared. We assemble at 0130. He looked around the room. "Anybody's got anything to say that hasn't been said, say it now." Nobody spoke. Cullen raised his coffee mug. Not toward anyone specific, just up, the way men do when they want to mark a moment without putting too many words on it. One by one, around the room, mugs and hands rose. 17 of them. Graves was the last. He raised his coffee. He looked at the faces around him, the old ones and the less old ones, the ones carrying 20 years of accumulated damage and the ones carrying 10, The ones who had chosen this life because it was all that was left, and the ones who had chosen it because it was the first thing that had ever made sense. He looked at them, and they looked back at him, and the moment held itself in the orange light and the smell of coffee and the distant sound of the desert wind against the walls. Then Boone's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up. Read it. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very flat and very still. He turned the phone and set it on the table so the room could read it. It was a text message. Unknown number. No preamble. We have Naomi Rowan. She's alive. Your move determines whether that continues. Deliver the girl and the drive to the coordinates below by midnight. Bring the Brotherhood, and we start with the children. The coordinates below were not the facility coordinates. They were the coordinates of Carla Weiss's house in Ely. The room went absolutely silent. Then Graves's phone rang. The screen read, Carla. He answered before the second ring. Carla's voice was controlled in the way of someone staying controlled by force of will. Graves. There are 3 cars outside. They've been there for 10 minutes. Lila's in the back room and she's calm. She knew this might happen. She told me she knew. A breath. She also told me to tell you something. She said, tell Graves the rabbit has a second pocket. The connection cut. Graves was already moving toward the door. Boone's hand landed on his arm. Not stopping him, just solid, present. Don't, Boone said, quiet, hard. Don't go alone. They'll take her if we don't move now. They'll take her if you ride in there alone and they have nothing left to negotiate with. Boone's grip didn't release. You know that. You know how this works. His eyes were steady. We go together, or we hand them exactly what they want. Graves stood in the doorway with the cold air hitting him from outside and the weight of 17 men behind him and the image of a child in a back room in Ely who had told him she knew this might happen and had still handed him a map and had still said, okay, that's enough. He stood there for 3 seconds that felt considerably longer. Then he turned back into the room. Change of plan, he said. His voice was entirely level. Lila is compromised. They've got eyes on Carla's house. He looked at Boone. They think they have leverage. They don't know we already sent the drive contents, Raines said. They don't know yet, Graves said, which means we have a window. He looked around the room, and Lila said the rabbit has a second pocket. He stopped. She sent Mr. Buttons with Carla, which means there's something in that rabbit we haven't seen yet. The room absorbed this. She held something back, Hatch said slowly, even from us. Her mother taught her, Graves said, never give everything to one person, never put everything in one place. He looked at Boone. Whatever's in that second pocket, that's the piece they're most afraid of. That's what this is really about. Boone looked at the text message still visible on the table. Then we need to get to that rabbit, he said, before they get to the girl. They're already at the house, Graves said. Then you'd better ride fast. Graves was already at the door. We ride in 20, Boone said to the room. All of us. Full formation. His voice had the quality of something final in it. We are done waiting for them to make the first move. The room erupted into motion. Graves walked out into the cold Nevada night and threw a leg over his Road King and kicked the engine alive. The sound of it hit the desert and came back changed, bigger, harder, the specific resonance of old iron waking up angry. He was already rolling toward the gate when the first of the others came out behind him. He didn't look back. The access road was empty. The 3 trucks from last night were gone, relocated, redeployed. He'd find out where when he got there and not before. The night was cold and clear, and the stars over the desert were indifferent to all of it, which was fine. He didn't need the stars to care. He needed to make Ely in 40 minutes on a road he knew in the dark, and he needed to get to a child who had held back one final piece of ammunition because her mother had taught her that survival meant never being entirely legible, never being entirely emptied out. He rode. Behind him, 17 sets of headlights came alive in the dark, one after another, and the sound of the Black Ash Brotherhood in full formation rolled out of the compound and into the Nevada night, like something that had been building for a very long time and had finally run out of reasons to stay quiet. Somewhere ahead, in a house in Ely, with a fenced yard and a large dog, an 8-year-old girl was sitting in a back room with a stuffed rabbit and 3 cars full of men outside. And she was not afraid in the way that children are afraid. She was afraid in the way that people are afraid when they understand exactly what the stakes are and have decided with full clarity that they are not going to let that stop them. Her mother had taught her that too. And somewhere in the desert, in a facility built beneath the surface of a land that looked empty and wasn't, 43 children were waiting in the dark for something that had never been promised to them and had never arrived. Until now. The highway opened up ahead of Graves like a dark ribbon thrown across the desert floor, and he opened the throttle, and the Road King surged forward into the black, and the cold air hit his face like a fact that couldn't be argued with. Whatever was in that second pocket, whatever Naomi Rowan had sewn into the hidden seam of a child's stuffed rabbit on the last night she'd felt safe enough to do it. It had survived 2 days in a diner, a night in a compound, an afternoon in Carla Weiss's house. It had survived because an 8-year-old girl had kept it alive by not telling anyone it existed until the moment she decided the right person was listening. The question was whether Graves could get there before the wrong people found out she'd told him. He didn't know the answer, but he was riding toward it at 90 miles an hour with 17 headlights behind him and absolutely nothing left to lose. And in the long history of human problems, that combination had sometimes been enough. Sometimes. He made Eli in 38 minutes. The town was quiet at that hour. A main street with half its neon still lit. A gas station. A bar with 3 trucks outside. Carla's neighborhood was 4 blocks off the main drag. A grid of small houses with chain-link fences and mature cottonwoods that had dropped their leaves and stood like gray scaffolding against the night sky. He killed his headlight 2 blocks out and coasted the last distance on engine idle alone. The 3 cars were still there. He counted them as he rolled past the cross street. 2 sedans and an SUV parked at intervals along the block with the practiced spacing of people who'd done this before. No interior lights, no movement, just the vehicles sitting in the dark like stones placed with intention. He went around the block and came in from the alley behind Carla's property. The back fence was wood, 6 feet, gate-latched from the inside. He put the bike against the alley wall, swung over the fence in one motion, landed in the yard, and crossed to the back door in 8 steps. He knocked 3 times, paused, knocked once. Carla opened it inside of 4 seconds. She'd been standing at the door. She stepped back without speaking. The house was dark, except for a single light in the kitchen at the far end of the hall, low, not visible from the street. The large dog, a gray shepherd mix named Hector, was pressed against the wall near the kitchen with his ears up and his body taut, watching Graves with the focused attention of an animal that had read the room and understood it. Carla pointed toward the back of the house. Graves moved. Leela was in the room at the end of the hall. A small room, child-sized furniture that wasn't from Carla's life, but had been prepared for some version of this possibility, which told Graves something about what Carla Weiss had become in the years since she stopped being a school counselor. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor with Mr. Buttons in her lap, and the overhead light off, her face lit by the ambient glow from the window. She'd pulled the curtain at an angle that let her see the street without being seen from it. She looked up when Graves came in. "You made good time," she said. "The second pocket," he said. "Where is it?" She turned the rabbit over and showed him the base, the flat bottom seam that factory rabbits had, but this one had been reinforced the same way the ear had been, the stitching tighter and newer than everything else. She handed him the multi-tool she'd been holding in her other hand, already open to the blade. He made a careful cut along the seam. Inside, rolled tight and wrapped in a single layer of plastic, was a photograph and a folded document. Not a flash drive this time. Physical paper. The kind of evidence that didn't need electricity to exist. He unrolled the photograph first. It was taken at distance, long lens, the way surveillance photographs were taken. It showed 2 men in conversation outside what appeared to be a restaurant, a parking lot, daylight, the men unaware of the camera. One of the men was identifiable from the Meridian files. Deputy Carver, younger by what looked like 3 years, in civilian clothes. The other man Graves didn't recognize immediately. Late 50s, a suit, the bearing of someone accustomed to operating at altitude. He unfolded the document. It was a single page, a transfer authorization. Meridian Developmental Services letterhead. Dated 26 months ago, it authorized the permanent placement of 11 children, names listed, ages listed, all under 12, to a facility identified only by a facility code, RDH-7, Redline Desert Holdings, Unit 7. The authorization signature at the bottom was not Judge Wallace Prentice. It was not Deputy Carver. It was Marcus Holt, State Senator, Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee, the man who had appointed Prentice to the family court. But that wasn't what stopped Graves. What stopped Graves was the countersignature, the secondary authorization required for any permanent placement under state law. The countersignature read, D. Harlan, Oversight Liaison, Nevada. DCFS, D. Harlan, Damon Harlan. Graves stood in the dark room and held the document and felt something in his chest do something complicated and very quiet. "What is it?" Lila said. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the document for another 5 seconds, making sure he was reading it correctly, making sure he wasn't constructing something that wasn't there out of the weight of the last 18 hours. He was reading it correctly. Outside, somewhere on the street, a car door opened and closed. "We need to leave," he said. "Right now." "What?" He got Lila over the back fence with 30 seconds to spare. Carla was behind them. She'd grabbed a bag that had clearly been packed in advance, because Carla Weiss was the kind of woman who kept a packed bag. And Hector came over the fence last, silent and focused, landing in the alley with the economical grace of an animal that trusted the situation to its instincts. The Brotherhood arrived as the first of the men from the sedans came through Carla's front gate. 18 headlights. Not 17. Graves counted again and got 18, which meant someone had brought a second machine, which he'd sort out later. They came down the street from both ends simultaneously, a movement so coordinated it had to have been called in transit, and the effect on the men at Carla's front gate was immediate and visceral. 2 of them stopped moving entirely. The third reached for something and then clearly reconsidered, looking at the wall of iron and headlights and men and doing the arithmetic quickly. They ran. Not all of them. 2 of the sedan's occupants held their ground, and there was a brief and efficient interaction near the front gate that Graves didn't see directly but heard, and that resolved in under 45 seconds in the Brotherhood's favor. Boone's voice, low and final, saying something that Graves couldn't make out word for word, but that had the specific quality of a sentence that ended discussions. Then Boone was in the alley. He looked at Graves. He looked at Lila. He looked at the rabbit in her arms. "We have to move," Graves said. "I know." Boone's voice was level. "One of theirs got a call out before Cullen got to him. We have maybe 15 minutes before this address is burned." "There's something you need to see," Graves said. "Not here." Boone looked at his face. He read whatever was on it. "How bad?" he said. "Complex," Graves said, because that was the truest word for it. They used a garage 4 blocks away, a mechanic's shop that Moss had a key to, which Graves did not ask about because there were aspects of Moss's life that operated on a need-to-know basis, and this was not the moment to need to know. They pulled 8 bikes inside and shut the rolling door and stood in the grease and metal dark under a single hanging work light, while outside the remaining Brotherhood kept watch. Graves laid the document and the photograph on the hood of a truck that was up on blocks in the corner. He stood back and let Boone read it. He watched Boone's face. In 14 years, he had seen Boone Harlan absorb news that would have broken most men. The death of riders, the collapse of a business they'd built together. The moment in 2017 when a state investigator had knocked on the compound gate and Boone had answered it knowing what was coming. He'd seen Boone hold all of it with the particular stillness of a man who had trained himself not to show the hit. He couldn't hold this one. It wasn't dramatic. There was no moment of collapse. His face just changed. Something behind it, something structural, gave way in a very small and very total way. And for approximately 4 seconds, Boone Harlan was 61 years old and entirely present to the worst thing. Then he picked the document up, read it again, set it down. "He signed it," Boone said. "Yes." "Damon signed it. His name is on it." "That doesn't mean—" Boone stopped, started again. "There are reasons someone's name could be on a document like this. Coercion, forgery. He could have been—" I know, Graves said. I don't know what it means yet. I'm not telling you it means what it looks like. Then what are you telling me? I'm telling you it exists. And they know it exists. And that's why they want the rabbit. Graves looked at him steadily. Not just for the flash drive, for this. Because this document connects Damon to the operation. And if it comes out, it doesn't matter if he was coerced or compromised or running some play we don't understand yet. His name is on a transfer authorization for 11 children who are currently in a hole in the desert. He paused. And his father is the president of the club that's coming for them. The garage was very quiet. The work light swayed slightly in some imperceptible draft, sending slow shadows across the floor. Hatch was looking at the document from where he stood near the wall. His face was doing the thing it did when he was running tactical assessments. Flat, fast, interior. They're not just protecting the operation, he said. They're protecting the narrative. They want to be able to say that the club's president had a son who was inside the network. That discredits everything we bring out. Anything we say about the trafficking, anything Naomi Rowan documented, they bury it under Damon's name. Controlled demolition, Raines said quietly. Of us, Graves said, of the evidence, of the children's testimony. He looked at Boone. They've been building the off-ramp since before we found the girl. Boone stood at the truck hood, with his hands at his sides and his face doing the small, precise work of a man who is deciding something about himself in real time, who he is going to be in the next hour. Whether the thing that just broke inside him is going to stay broken, or whether he is going to pick it up and carry it until he can put it down somewhere that doesn't cost everything else. I need 5 minutes, he said. Nobody moved. Alone, he said. They moved. Graves took Lila to the far end of the garage, where a metal shelving unit held labeled parts bins, and a hand-painted sign on the wall said, "Measure twice," in faded red letters. He crouched to her level. How much of that did you understand? He said. She looked at him. Most of it. What do you want to ask me? Damon. That was his son? Yes. Was Damon bad? Graves thought about how to answer that with both honesty and precision for someone who was 8 years old and deserved neither a lie nor a weight she didn't need yet. I don't know, he said. I think something bad happened to him. I think he might have been in a situation where there weren't any good choices. He paused. But I don't know yet. She looked at Mr. Buttons. My mom has his name in her files, she said. I saw it once, on her computer screen, before she started keeping it in the car. She looked up. She was crying. She closed the laptop when she saw me looking. Graves went still. What do you mean you saw his name? Damon Harlan, in a list. I only saw it for a second. She frowned, remembering. There was a date next to it, and a word I didn't understand. She concentrated. Deposition. Graves looked at her. Your mother had a deposition record with Damon Harlan's name on it. I think so. She paused. Is that important? It means, Graves said carefully, that your mother may have talked to him before he died. The implication of that, what it might mean about how Damon's name ended up on that document, what it might mean about what he'd told Naomi Rowan, what it might mean about why the official record showed a suicide and why Boone had never believed it, arrived in Graves's mind with the specific weight of something that rearranges everything you thought you understood about a situation. Naomi Rowan hadn't just documented the trafficking network. She had talked to Damon Harlan, and Damon Harlan had died 6 months later. From somewhere at the front of the garage, Boone said, Graves. His voice had changed back. Controlled, flat, operational. Whoever he'd been in the 5 minutes alone, that person had done the work required and stepped aside. Graves went back to the truck hood. Boone was standing with the document in his hand. He looked at Graves. My son didn't sign this willingly, he said. It wasn't a plea and it wasn't a delusion. It was a statement of what he believed and what he was going to act on, delivered in a voice that had nothing uncertain in it. I don't know exactly what happened yet, but I know my son, and I know he didn't do this because he wanted to. He set the document down, which means someone made him, and that someone killed him when he stopped being useful. He looked at the map, Lila's hand-drawn map, which Hatch had spread on the hood next to the document. Naomi Rowan talked to him. She has a deposition record, which means somewhere in whatever she documented, there is a record of what was done to my son and who did it. That record may be in the facility, Graves said. I know, Boone said. I know that's what they're protecting. He looked at Hatch. Is the approach still viable? More viable now that we know about the second document, Hatch said. They'll be expecting us to use it as leverage to negotiate. They don't expect us to come in anyway. We come in anyway, Boone said. Yes, Hatch said. Boone looked at Graves. Something passed between them that was not forgiveness and not absolution, and not any of the things that would come later if there was a later. It was just two men who had known each other long enough to understand what the other one needed to hear right now and what could wait. We go now, Graves said. Before they regroup. Boone nodded. Rains, Graves said. Already sent, Rains said from the corner. He was holding his phone with the screen showing a sent messages confirmation. All 4 recipients, 30 seconds ago. He put the phone in his pocket. It's out. There's no pulling it back. The document, the financial records, the audio files. Naomi Rowan's voice, careful and controlled and terrified, naming names in a moving car while her daughter slept in an apartment she'd already decided to leave. Out in the world now. Moving through encrypted channels toward people who could not be threatened by the same machine that had threatened everyone else, because the machine hadn't known about them until 60 seconds ago. Graves looked at Lila. She was watching him from the far end of the garage. You stay with Carla, he said. She'll take you somewhere else. Somewhere we haven't used. You don't move until you hear from me. How will I know it's really you? He thought for a moment. I'll tell you what Teeks said to you in the bunk room, the first night, about why the vote would go the right way. She considered this, nodded. Okay, she said. He crossed to her and crouched one more time to her level. Up close, in the dim garage light, she looked exactly her age for once. The exhaustion and the fear and the specific grief of a child who had been managing impossible things for impossible reasons was all right there on her face, unguarded for just this moment. I'm going to find her, he said. She held his gaze. I know, she said. And she said it the way she said most things, not with the blind faith of a child, but with the measured conviction of someone who had decided to believe something because the alternative was unbearable, and she had long since stopped taking the unbearable option. He stood. He pulled on his jacket. He looked at the men in the garage, Boone, Hatch, Rains, Moss, Decker, and through the rolling door the rest of them in the cold street, waiting. And he felt the specific gravity of what they were about to do, the weight of it, the irreversibility of it. All 17 of them passed the point where turning back was possible or desired. Carla appeared from the side door and went to Lila without being asked. Hector materialized from somewhere and pressed against Lila's leg. Lila put her hand on the dog's head. Graves rolled the garage door up. The night hit them, cold, clear, the stars absurdly numerous over the high desert, indifferent as always. 17 bikes in the street, engines off, men on them, waiting, watching the door. Graves walked to his Road King. He threw a leg over, settled into the seat, felt the familiar weight of the machine under him. The specific gravity of 230 pounds of iron that had been with him through things he didn't have names for. He put the key in. He looked down the street at the assembled brotherhood, the headlights beginning to come on one at a time as engines started, a sound like a percussive argument building from a whisper to a statement. Boone pulled up beside him. Their engines idled at the same frequency for a moment, a coincidence of mechanics or something else. When we get there, Boone said, not looking at him, and I find the man who gave my son no choice. I know, Graves said. I need you to be the one who stops me if I need stopping. I know. Can you do that? Graves thought about everything that question contained, what it meant to be asked by a man to be the thing standing between him and the worst version of himself in the worst moment, what it meant about trust, about the years that had built this specific kind of obligation between them. Yes, he said. Boone nodded once. He opened his throttle. His bike pulled forward. Graves followed. Behind them, in a loose formation that tightened as it moved, 17 sets of headlights turned southeast toward the desert, toward the coordinates burned into Graves's memory from a child's careful pencil drawing, toward a facility built underground to hide the things that power does when it has decided that the rules don't apply to it. The town fell away behind them. The highway opened up. The cold air came in hard and clean off the desert, and the stars wheeled overhead, and the engines made their low, sustained thunder across the flat black land. Graves rode and did not think about what he was riding toward. He thought about an 8-year-old girl memorizing coordinates in a kitchen while her mother's hands shook. He thought about a woman making recordings in a moving car because staying still felt like dying. He thought about 43 names on a printed list and the number that was under 12 and the number that had been in the system for more than a year. He thought about Damon Harlan, 26 years old, carrying something he couldn't put down and couldn't carry, walking into the official system his father had warned him about, and finding out why that warning existed. He thought about what Naomi Rowan had done with whatever Damon had told her, whether she'd understood what it cost him, whether she'd tried to find another way before she used it. He thought about the deposition record on a computer screen and a woman closing the laptop when her daughter looked over her shoulder. Some things you document because the world needs to know them. Some things you carry alone for as long as you can because putting them down means someone else has to pick them up. Naomi Rowan had tried both. Now it was 17 men on Harleys and 40 miles of desert and whatever waited on the other side of a service road that wasn't on any current map. The Road King hit 90 and held it, the desert blurring past on both sides, the cold air a physical fact against his face. Behind him, the formation held tight. Ahead of him, invisible under the desert floor, children were waiting in the dark. And somewhere in the same facility, in a room he hadn't found yet, behind a door he hadn't opened, Naomi Rowan was either alive or she wasn't, and the only way to find out was to... The service road was exactly where Lila's map said it would be. Graves found it by feel more than sight. A break in the scrub line on the east side of County Road 847, 2 tire tracks pressed into calichy soil that hadn't seen regular use in years, but hadn't fully healed over either. He killed his headlight and took it slow, the Road King picking through the ruts by starlight, and behind him the formation did the same. 17 lights going dark in sequence, the sound dropping to a low idle that the desert wind could almost cover. Almost. They came in without lights for the last half mile. The facility announced itself not by what you could see, but by what you could smell. Diesel exhaust, the particular chemical flatness of treated air being vented, and underneath both, something that Graves couldn't name, but that his body identified before his mind did. A kind of tension in the air, like the desert itself was holding its breath. Then the perimeter fence materialized out of the dark. Chain link, 8 feet, topped with wire. Floodlights on tall poles spaced 40 meters apart, but only 3 of the 4 nearest poles were lit. One dark, bulb burned out or deliberately killed, leaving a gap in the coverage on the northeast corner. Hatch saw it the same moment Graves did. They stopped. Engines off. 17 men in the dark on 2 wheels, and the only sounds were the wind and the distant hum of the generator building Rains had identified from the satellite imagery. Hatch moved up beside Graves. He pointed at the dark pole, then at the fence line beneath it, then held up 2 fingers and pointed left, 1 finger and pointed right. Graves nodded. They went in 3 minutes later. The fence took Cullen and Ellis 40 seconds. Bolt cutters, practiced. The chain link peeled back in a clean fold. The gap was large enough for a man moving fast. Not large enough for what happened next, because what happened next was that the generator building 60 meters inside the perimeter came alive with the sound of voices, urgent, too many of them, and then 2 floodlights that had been off came on at once, and the northeast corner of the facility went from dark to blinding in under a second. They'd known about the gap in the coverage. They'd been waiting for someone to use it. Graves went through the fence anyway. He heard Boone behind him, and Hatch, and the sound of boots on hardpan multiplying as the others followed because there was no other option now. Going back meant going back into the open desert with nowhere to go and no advantage, and children still underground and Naomi Rowan still wherever she was. Forward was the only direction that meant anything. The first 2 men came around the corner of the generator building at a run. They were not deputies. They were private security. Tactical gear, Carbines. The practice movement of people who had done this before in other contexts. Graves hit the first one before he got his weapon level, inside the reach of the carbine, a shoulder into the man's sternum that put him on the ground and kept him there. The second man swung wide and ran directly into Hatch, which was the last mistake that particular man made in an upright position. Then they were past the generator building, and the main structure was in front of them. It was larger than the satellite imagery had suggested. The surface footprint was a low, flat building that looked like an equipment storage facility, deliberately unremarkable, but the ventilation infrastructure running along its north wall indicated the true scale of what was below. 8 ventilation columns. Graves counted them as he ran. 8 columns meant significant underground square footage. Significant underground square footage meant the capacity estimate Rains had given them was conservative. The main entrance was on the south side. Graves went north. The access point Lila's map had marked on the east face was a steel door set into a concrete block, flush with the building, no external handle, open from inside or with a key panel. The key panel had a card reader and a numeric pad. Rains was 3 seconds behind him. Rains looked at the panel, pulled something from his vest, and had it open in 40 seconds. Not elegantly. The panel sparked, and the card reader died, and the door clicked. And that was enough. They went down. The stairs were concrete, steep, lit by emergency strip lighting along the floor. The air changed immediately. Cooler, processed, with an undertone that Graves recognized as the specific quality of air that had been shared by too many people in too small a space for too long. He'd smelled it in places he didn't like remembering. It meant enclosed quarters. It meant people who hadn't been outside recently. It meant the children were here. The bottom of the stairs opened into a corridor, concrete block walls. Doors on both sides, heavy, with small reinforced windows at eye level. The strip lighting cast everything in a pale blue that made everyone look like they were already somewhere worse. Graves went to the first door. The window showed a room approximately 4 meters by 4. Bare floor, 2 cots. On one of the cots, a child, young, maybe 9, curled on their side with their back to the door, the specific stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was safer than movement. Graves's hand hit the door handle, locked, deadbolt, not card reader, keyed. Hatch, he said. Hatch was already there. He didn't have a key. He had a Halligan bar and the deadbolt was good steel, but the door frame was construction-grade concrete block from 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, in good steel and a determined man with a Halligan bar had a predictable outcome. The door came open. The child on the cot didn't move. Decker went in. He was already moving the way he moved when he was doing the thing he'd trained to do before he'd been anything else. Low voice, slow approach, hands visible, the specific body language of someone communicating safety with their entire physical presence. "Hey," Decker said, "we're not them. We're leaving. You can come with us." The child turned over. A girl, maybe 10. Dark circles under her eyes so deep they looked like bruising. She looked at Decker, then at the door, then at Graves behind it. She sat up. She didn't speak. She stood up. That was enough. So they found 22 children in the corridor. 22 doors, 22 rooms, not all of them occupied. Some held 2 children, some 1, the youngest Graves estimated at 6 years old, and he made himself not stop on that number because stopping on numbers right now would cost him something he needed to keep. Decker and Moss ran the extraction, calm, systematic, the children coming out of the rooms in the dazed, careful way of people who had been told too many times that things were about to change and had learned not to believe it until they were somewhere different. Some of them held hands with each other without being told to, which indicated they'd been here long enough to form bonds, which told Graves something about the timeline that he filed away to be furious about later. He went deeper. The corridor turned left at the end and opened into a larger space, a room that had been fitted as some kind of administrative area with actual furniture, a desk, filing cabinets, monitors on the wall showing camera feeds from the surface. The camera feeds showed the compound above in controlled chaos. More security personnel converging on the northeast corner, which meant the main Brotherhood force on the surface was engaged, which meant Boone's split formation was doing what Boone had designed it to do. Draw them up. Keep them up. While the secondary team went down, On the desk, a phone was ringing. It rang 4 times and stopped. Graves looked at the filing cabinets. He looked at the monitors. He looked at the door on the far side of the room, which was different from the cell doors. Heavier, with an electronic lock that had a keypad and a secondary deadbolt. From behind that door came a sound. A voice. Low, hoarse. The particular quality of a voice that had been doing a lot of talking in a small space under difficult conditions. He couldn't make out words, but it was there, present, alive. He went to the keypad. He didn't have Rains, he had himself, and about 30 seconds before someone else arrived in this room. He looked at the deadbolt. He looked at the door frame. He took 3 steps back and went through it shoulder first, the way he'd been taught in a different life in a different uniform. The way that worked on frame-mounted locks, when the alternative was a conversation with a keypad you didn't have the code for. The frame held. He hit it again. The 3rd time, it gave. The room behind it was small, a chair, a cot, a figure on the cot who had been sitting up when the door came open and was now on her feet. Fast, instinctive, pressing back against the wall with her hands up in the posture of someone who had learned that whatever came through a door in this place was not going to be good. The woman was mid-30s, dark hair, unwashed, a bruise along her left jaw, old enough to have gone yellow at the edges. She was thin in the way of someone who'd been surviving on institutional calories. Her eyes, in the emergency lighting, were dark and exhausted and furious and entirely, completely lucid. "Naomi Rowan," Graves said. She looked at him, at the patch on his jacket, at the patch specifically. The burning skull, the crossed pistons, the Nevada rocker. Something happened in her face. Not relief exactly, something older than relief, the thing that comes before it, when you've held yourself together so long that the first sign of rescue feels dangerous because you can't afford to let go until you're sure. "Black ash," she said. Her voice was exactly what the recording had sounded like, controlled, careful, trying not to shake. "She found you." "She found me," Graves said. "First." From above them, through the concrete ceiling, the sound of the engagement on the surface shifted. More concentrated, then a sustained noise that Graves identified as motorcycles, plural, and the unmistakable sound of a chain-link gate taking a significant impact. Boone was bringing the main force in. "We need to move," Graves said. "There are children. We have them. 22. We need to go." She moved toward the door and then stopped and turned back to the cot and pulled something from beneath it. A notebook, spiral-bound, thick with pages. She tucked it inside her shirt. "What's that, Mishtas?" Graves said. "Everything they didn't know I was still writing down," she said. "Every name, every transaction, everything Damon told me." She met his eyes. He didn't want to sign that document. They had footage of him accessing the Meridian database without authorization. They said they'd destroy his military career. He was trying to find evidence from the inside when they caught him. She paused, one deliberate breath. "He told me everything. I promised him I'd make it count." Graves stood in the broken doorway of a room under the Nevada desert and looked at a woman who had spent months underground holding the record of what had been done to dozens of children and to one young man who'd tried to stop it, and paid for that with everything. "It counted," he said. "Rain sent the drive 40 minutes ago. It's already out." She looked at him. "His name is in there," she said. "In the files, the signed document." "I know," Graves said. "His father's upstairs." Something crossed her face, complex, fast, too layered to name. "Boone Harlan," she said. "Yes." "He needs to know what his son was doing," she said. "He needs to know it wasn't—" "He already believes that," Graves said. "Come on." They went back through the broken door, through the administrative room, down the corridor toward the stairwell, where Decker and Moss were moving the last of the children toward the exit, small figures in the blue emergency light, quiet and careful, and watching everything. Naomi stopped when she saw them. She stood in the corridor and looked at 22 children, and her face went completely apart for about 4 seconds. Not in weakness, not in collapse, but in the specific way of someone who has held a terrible knowledge alone for a long time and is now standing in the physical reality of what that knowledge meant. She breathed, she held it, she put it back. Then she went to the nearest child, a small girl, maybe 7, with a green jacket 2 sizes too large, and crouched to her level. "Hey," Naomi said. "What's your name?" The girl looked at her. "Mia." "Mia, we're going upstairs now. It's loud up there." She held out her hand. "Stay with me." Mia took her hand. They went up the stairs toward the sound of engines and shouting and the particular quality of chaos that means something is ending. Not cleanly, not without cost, but ending. And at the top of the stairs, as they came through the door into the cold Nevada night, the floodlights were everywhere, and the sound of Harleys was enormous, and Graves came out of the ground into the open air and saw the Brotherhood holding the perimeter and Boone Harlan standing 20 meters away, facing a man in a suit who was backed against the generator building with nowhere left to go. The man in the suit, late 50s, the bearing of someone accustomed to operating at altitude. The man from the photograph in the Rabbit, Marcus Holt. Boone was looking at him with the face of a man who had arrived at the exact location where the worst thing he'd ever done, and the worst thing ever done to him, had a single address, and was deciding, in real time, what kind of man he was going to be in the next 30 seconds. His hand was at his side, not moving, but not still either. Graves crossed the distance between them at a run. Graves reached Boone in 4 strides. He didn't grab him. He put himself beside him, shoulder to shoulder, close enough that Boone could feel the contact through the leather. And he stood there between Boone and whatever Boone was about to do, not as a barrier, but as a presence, a witness. The specific kind of company that says, "I am here and I see you, and you don't have to do this alone." Marcus Holt was pressed against the generator building with his suit jacket torn at the shoulder and his careful, expensive bearing entirely dismantled. He was 60 years old, and he looked it now in a way he probably hadn't looked it this morning, when the world had still been organized in his favor. His eyes moved between Boone and Graves with the calculating quality of a man who was still trying to find the angle, still trying to locate the leverage point, still operating on the assumption that there was always a deal to be made. "You need me alive," Holt said. His voice was controlled. It had spent 60 years being controlled. "You need my testimony. You need the full network map. Without me, you have files, you have recordings. We have everything," Graves said. "It went out 40 minutes ago." Something shifted in Holt's face. The angle disappeared. "Then you need me for the deposition," he said. Recalibrating. "The federal case, without a cooperating Damon Harlan," Boone said. Just that. 2 words. The name, flat, complete. The way you say something that has been living in your chest for 8 months and finally has somewhere to go. Holt went quiet. "He came to you," Boone said. "He found out what Meridian was doing, and he came to you because you were on the oversight committee. Because that was the right channel. Because that was what the young man who believed in systems does when he finds out a system is broken." His voice hadn't changed in volume or pitch. It was the most frightening thing about it. "And you used him. You put his name on the authorization. You built him into the structure so that if it came down, he came down with it." Holt said nothing. "And then he came to Naomi Rowan," Boone said, "because he ran out of official options. And 6 months after that, he was dead." He took 1 step forward. "Tell me that was coincidence." Holt looked at him. The calculation was gone now. What was left was something uglier and more honest. The face of a man who had made a long series of decisions and had never, until this moment, been required to look at them directly. "It wasn't coincidence," Holt said. The words fell on the ground between them. Graves felt Boone go completely still beside him, the kind of still that is not calm, the kind of still that is the last moment before something irreversible. "Boone," Graves said. Quiet. Just his name. A long moment. The floodlights hummed. Somewhere behind them, Decker's voice was managing children toward the perimeter gap. Naomi's voice, steadier than it had any right to be, was answering questions from 2 of them. The desert wind moved through and kept moving. Boone's hand dropped to his side. Fully. Open. He looked at Holt for 3 more seconds. Looked at him with the complete, unguarded weight of everything the last 8 months had cost. Everything he'd carried alone. Every morning he'd woken up into a world where his son was dead, and he hadn't understood why. And then he turned away. He turned away, and he walked toward the perimeter, and he didn't look back. Graves looked at Holt. "Get on your knees," Graves said, "and keep your hands where I can see them." Holt got on his knees. His suit was ruined. His hands shook very slightly as he placed them on his thighs. Graves called for Cullen. Cullen came. Graves walked away. Federal vehicles arrived at 0430, not local law enforcement. Raines had been specific about the recipient list, had known which federal contacts operated independently of Holt's network, and which ones didn't, and the two agents who came in first were from an office 3 states removed with no existing relationship to Nevada's county structure. They arrived in 2 vehicles. They arrived efficiently, and they had clearly been reading Naomi Rowan's documentation for most of the drive, because they asked questions that could only come from someone who already understood the architecture of what they were looking at. Holt was in custody within 12 minutes. Deputy Carver was found at the facility's surface control room. He'd tried to leave via the main access road and encountered Hatch, which meant he'd tried to leave and then immediately stopped trying to leave. He was zip-tied to a fence post when the federal agents arrived and had been saying the same 4 words on a loop for approximately 20 minutes. "I want a lawyer." Hatch had told him that was fine and had not untied him. Judge Wallace Prentice was arrested at his home in Caliente at 5:15 in the morning. The agent who made that call reported later that Prentice had opened the door in a bathrobe and had looked at the warrant with the expression of a man who had known this morning was coming and had simply been waiting to find out which one it was. Senator Marcus Holt's office issued a statement at 7 a.m. that nobody believed, and that was rendered irrelevant by 8 a.m. when the full documentation package, Naomi Rowan's files, the flash drive contents, the audio recordings, the financial transfer records, and the photograph from Mr. Button's second pocket was simultaneously published by 2 independent investigative outlets. The digital cascade that followed was the kind that institutional corruption fears more than any single arrest. Not a story, but a structure, fully formed, sourced, corroborated, and requiring no interpretation because Naomi Rowan had interpreted it already in a moving car at 1 in the morning while her daughter slept. The 22 children from the underground facility were transported to a hospital in Ely. 11 more were located at secondary sites identified through Holt's initial federal questioning, which was brief and comprehensive because Holt, once his deal with the Angle had permanently expired, discovered that cooperation was the only remaining card he held. The total number of children recovered in the operation's first 72 hours reached 31. 31 of 43. The remaining 12 would take longer. Some of them would be found. Some of them had been transferred outside the state. The investigation that Raines's recipients had now launched would run for years, would reach into 3 additional states, would eventually result in the dissolution of Meridian Developmental Services, and a legislative review of Nevada's foster placement oversight that bore Naomi Rowan's name in its formal title. But on that cold morning outside Ely, in the pale pre-dawn hour when the desert was turning from black to gray to the particular washed gold of early light, the number was 31, and 31 was not 43. And Graves stood outside the hospital's emergency entrance and looked at the number and held it without looking away from it. He'd learned that from the Marines. You held the number. You didn't average it or contextualize it or put it in proportion to anything. You held it, and you let it be what it was. 12 children still somewhere in the world. That was the number. That was what it cost. Teeks came to stand beside him. He had a cup of coffee from somewhere inside. Not good coffee, hospital coffee, the kind that was hot and present and asked nothing of you. And he handed it to Graves without speaking. Graves drank it. "Decker's with the kids," Teeks said eventually. "How are they?" "He says physically, most of them are." He paused. "He says physically, they're going to be okay." The pause carried what that sentence left out. "Yeah," Graves said. "The littlest one," Teeks said. "The 6-year-old. She hasn't let go of his hand." Graves drank his coffee. "He's going to need some time," Teeks said. "After this." "We're all going to need some time," Graves said. Teeks nodded. He looked at the desert horizon where the gold was deepening. "Boone's in the parking lot," he said. "Been there a while." Boone was sitting on the hood of a federal vehicle that had been vacated when its occupant went inside. He was looking at the sky with his hands on his knees, and in the early light he looked his age in a way he didn't usually look it. Not old, not diminished, but fully inhabited by 61 years of consequences, which was different. Graves sat beside him on the hood. They didn't speak for a while. A helicopter moved across the sky in the direction of the facility site, then another. The federal operation was expanding, moving into the secondary structures that Holt's testimony had identified. "Naomi's going to testify about Damon," Boone said. "She told me." "I know." "She said he knew it was going to cost him. He told her when they met." He paused. "He said he'd found a way to pull the authorization records from Meridian's backup server, the ones that showed which placements had been falsified. He was going to hand them to her so she could include them in her documentation." Another pause. "He never made it to the meeting." Graves looked at the sky. "He was trying to fix it," Boone said. "The thing I told him wasn't our business. He went back and tried to fix it himself." "Yes," Graves said. "I told him to go to the right authorities." "Yes. And then I just kept the compound, kept the road, let it go." His voice was entirely flat. "I let it go, Graves." "You didn't know." "I didn't want to know." He looked at his hands. "That's not the same thing." Graves had no argument with that. There was no argument to make. The thing Boone was carrying was the thing Boone was going to carry, and the only honest response was to acknowledge its weight rather than try to reduce it. "He went back," Graves said, "on his own, after you said no. He found Naomi Rowan. He found a way in." He paused. "He was your son." Boone was quiet for a long time. "Yeah," he said. "He was." The sun cleared the horizon. The desert turned its morning colors, copper and rose and the specific pale yellow that existed only in that first hour before the bleaching heat arrived. "I'm going to need to call his mother," Boone said. "I know." "I don't know what I'm going to say." "You'll say the truth," Graves said. "That's usually enough." Boone turned and looked at him. Something in the look, old, certain, the specific quality of trust between men who have stood in enough hard places together to stop needing to perform certainty they don't have. "Thank you," Boone said, "for stopping me." "You stopped yourself," Graves said. Boone thought about that for a moment. "Maybe," he said, "but it helped to have company." Carla brought Lila to the hospital at 7:15. Graves saw the car from across the parking lot and crossed to meet it. Carla had barely pulled in before the passenger door opened and Lila was out of it and running across the asphalt in her oversized jacket with Mr. Buttons under her arm and her dark hair flying. She didn't run to Graves. She ran past him, through the emergency entrance, down the hall. She must have asked Carla, or known, or simply followed the instinct that had been navigating her through impossible things since this started, and through a set of double doors to the ward where Naomi Rowan had been moved after initial triage. Graves followed at a walk. He stopped in the doorway. Naomi was sitting up in the hospital bed with the yellow-edged bruise on her jaw and the IV in her arm, and the notebook that she hadn't let go of since the underground facility still on the bedside table within reach. She was looking at the door when it opened, and when Lila came through it, when she came through it at speed and hit the side of the bed, and Naomi's arms came around her and they held on with the complete wordless urgency of people who had believed this was not going to happen and were now required to recalibrate everything they'd prepared themselves for. Graves stood in the doorway and watched and felt something in his chest that had been locked down for approximately 36 hours make a decision to unlock itself, which was a problem he addressed by looking at the ceiling for a moment and breathing very deliberately until the decision reversed. He looked back. Naomi was holding Lila's face in both hands, looking at her the way you look at something you weren't sure you'd see again. "Hi, baby," Naomi said. Lila's chin was working very hard at something. "Hi, Mom," she said. Then Lila saw Mr. Buttons, which she was still holding, and she pressed the rabbit into her mother's hands with the focused deliberateness of someone completing a task they had accepted and carried and were now formally releasing. "He kept everything safe," Lila said. Naomi held the rabbit. She looked at the repaired ear, the cut seam, the second pocket that was empty now. She turned it over in her hands once, and the care with which she did it, the way you handle something that has meant everything, was its own complete sentence. Graves stepped back from the doorway and let the door close. Og. He found an alcove down the hall with a window that looked east, toward the desert, toward the direction of the facility site where helicopters were still moving and federal vehicles were still arriving. He stood there for a while. Then he took out his phone. He held it for a moment. He looked at the contact, the number he hadn't called in 3 years, the number he'd kept in the phone through 2 phones because deleting it had always felt like a finalization he wasn't ready to make. His son. 23 years old, living in Portland, working in construction, doing fine without a father who had been too broken for too long to figure out how to be one again. He had thought about this moment before. He had thought about it in the abstract, the way you think about things you've decided are probably not possible. What you would say. Whether it would be enough. Whether 3 years of silence made the conversation available or unavailable. He thought about Lila saying she kept going anyway. He dialed. It rang twice. Dad? The word hit him somewhere that had been braced for it and got hit anyway. Hey, Graves said. His voice was level. It cost him something to keep it that way. I know it's early. A pause. The sound of someone sitting up, adjusting. It's okay. Another pause. Is everything okay? I'm okay, Graves said. He stopped, started again. I wanted to call. He looked at the desert through the window. I wanted to tell you I'm okay, and that I know I haven't. He stopped again. I know I wasn't. A long silence. Dad, his son said, and then quietly. Okay. Just that. Okay, the way Lila said it, the smallest word doing the heaviest work. Can I come see you? Graves said. When this is done. Another pause, shorter this time. Yeah, his son said. You can come see me. Graves stood at the window and breathed. Outside, the desert held its morning light without drama. The sage was silver in it. The rocks were the color of old bone. The sky was the impossible, indifferent, permanent blue of the high desert in winter, and it asked nothing and promised nothing and simply was, which right now was enough. I'll call you, Graves said, when I know the date. Okay, his son said. I'll be here. He hung up. He stood for a moment longer, holding the phone against his chest. Then he put it in his pocket and walked back down the hall. They left Ely at noon. Not all at once. There were federal statements to be given, documentation to be provided, the Brotherhood formally identified as material witnesses in an ongoing investigation that was going to be ongoing for a very long time. The federal agent running the primary interview was a woman named Sorensen, and she was thorough and precise, and when Graves told her about Naomi Rowan's notebook, she looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has been handed a structural piece they'd been looking for. That book goes to our evidence team, she said. You'll need to ask Naomi Rowan about that, Graves said. She's the one who wrote it. Sorensen went and asked Naomi Rowan about it. She came back 20 minutes later with the notebook in an evidence bag and an expression that suggested the conversation had been direct and had resulted in a specific set of understandings about how that evidence would be handled and what would happen if it wasn't. Graves did not ask for details. He believed the outcome. They gave their statements in pairs in the conference room that the hospital's administrative staff had made available with the bewildered efficiency of people who had woken up this morning in a world where this was not happening and had adjusted. Teeks and Decker together. Moss alone, which was how Moss preferred things. Ellis and Cullen. Hatch, who gave his statement in 11 minutes and emerged looking exactly as he had going in. Boone gave his last, alone, for 40 minutes. When he came out, he found Graves in the corridor. She's clean, Boone said. Naomi. Sorensen confirmed. She's a protected witness. Full cooperation agreement. Her testimony is foundational to the federal case. He paused. Her and Lila both. They'll need somewhere to stay, Graves said. I know. While the case builds, somewhere out of the county, somewhere they're not visible. Boone looked at him. You offering the compound? I'm saying it's an option. That's a long time to have guests. Some guests are worth it, Graves said. Boone was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his face. Not a smile exactly, but the thing that happens in the vicinity of a smile in people for whom smiling was never the primary mode. Ask Naomi, he said. It's her call. Graves went and asked Naomi. She looked at him from the hospital bed, and she looked at Lila sitting in the chair beside her with Mr. Buttons and a hospital-issue cup of apple juice, and she asked one question. Is it safe? As safe as I can make it, Graves said. She thought about that for a moment. She looked at Lila. Lila was already looking at Graves. Tell him yes, Lila said. Naomi looked at Graves. She says yes, she said, with the particular tone of a mother who has learned when to let her daughter's instincts lead. I heard her, Graves said. The Brotherhood left in formation, not running, not fleeing. 17 bikes down the main street of Ely in the noon sun, engines at road speed, unhurried. They drew looks from the people on the sidewalks, the way they always drew looks, the way that would never entirely change. But the looks had something different in them today that Graves noticed from the front of the formation without being able to name precisely. Something that acknowledged, in the way that communities sometimes acknowledge things without saying them directly, that something had happened nearby, and these were people who had been part of it. Nobody waved. Nobody needed to. They took Route 93 south because it was the long way back, but it ran through better country. The kind of open, high-desert country that expanded something in the chest that needed expanding after 36 hours in small rooms with large consequences. The road was empty at that hour on a weekday, and the formation spread out the way formations spread out when there's room, bikes finding their individual spacing. The mechanical symphony of 17 engines settling into the particular harmony of long-distance riding. Graves was in front. He wasn't thinking about anything specifically. He was thinking about the road and the air and the specific quality of December light over the Nevada desert, which was low and clear and had a way of making the distances look smaller than they were without making them feel smaller. He thought about Damon Harlan, 26 years old and trying to fix something that wasn't his fault and wasn't his to fix, and who'd done it anyway because he was his father's son in the ways that mattered. He thought about what it meant to build something with the intention of being different from the thing you'd walked away from, and whether you ever fully succeeded, and whether the point was success or whether the point was the trying, and the willingness to keep trying even when the trying cost you something. He thought about Lila Rowan on the back of a moving motorcycle, her arms around his waist, her face turned into his jacket, carrying evidence that could burn a trafficking network, and choosing, with full knowledge of what she was carrying, to trust a man she'd never met because her mother had taught her what trustworthy looked like. He thought about his son saying, "I'll be here," in a voice that had not demanded explanation or apology for 3 years of silence. The generosity of that. The specific grace of a young man who had apparently inherited something from his father that wasn't the damage. The formation held its shape behind him for 3 hours. When the compound came into view, the low buildings against the desert hills, the perimeter fence, the familiar silhouette of the machine shop that had become something else over 14 years of use, Graves felt the specific sensation of return that has nothing to do with destination, not arriving at a place. Arriving at the thing the place represents. The decision made and held over years to be a particular kind of person in a particular kind of company, standing in the gap between the world as it is and the world as the most vulnerable people in it need it to be. They pulled through the gate. The yard was quiet. The afternoon light fell across the gravel at a low angle. Somebody had put a pot of coffee on inside. The smell reached the yard when the wind turned, and it was the best thing that had smelled like anything in a long time. Engines died, one at a time. The silence that followed had the quality of something earned. Men sat for a moment on their bikes before dismounting, each in his own way, each taking the transition from motion to stillness at his own pace. Boone was the last to kill his engine. He sat for a moment with his hands on the bars and looked at the compound, the hall, the fence, the hills behind it, the sky above all of it. Then he climbed off. He pulled off his gloves. He looked at the men around him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He walked inside. One by one, they followed. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon that was cold and clear and entirely ordinary, Lila Rowan sat on the wooden steps at the back of the main hall and watched a group of 6 motorcycles come in from the highway. She'd been watching the gate more days than not. She knew she did it. She didn't stop. Naomi was inside at the long table with Boone, working through the documentation that the federal case required. There was a great deal of it, and Naomi worked through it with the methodical, precise energy of someone who had been doing this work mentally for months and was finally doing it on paper with the appropriate people present. Boone had turned out to be a useful person to do this with, in ways that neither of them had anticipated, and that Lila found neither surprising nor interesting because she had seen the shape of it earlier than either of them had. The 6 bikes parked in the yard. The riders stretched and pulled off helmets, and one of them, Decker, who had been at a hospital in Reno doing something that he described as a training refresher and that Teek said was more complicated than that, looked toward the back steps and raised a hand at Lila. She raised her hand back. Mr. Buttons was in her lap. His ear had been re-sewn. Naomi had done it 2 days after they arrived at the compound, sat at the long table with a needle and thread and re-sewn both ears to match length while Lila watched. Not the hidden pocket. The ear. She'd done it because Lila liked it when he looked right, and because some things that had been necessary didn't need to stay that way. The sun was dropping toward the western hills. The desert took on its late afternoon quality. The shadows long, the light going amber, the sage catching color it didn't have at midday. Lila watched the riders cross the yard and disappear into the main hall. She could hear the voices assembling inside, the particular low register of men who had known each other long enough that silence was comfortable but weren't using it right now. Teek's laugh, which was enormous. Moss saying something brief that made 2 other people respond. The sound of the compound being what it was, a place where people who had chosen each other over the available alternatives had built something that didn't have a standard name but didn't need one. She thought about the last day at the hospital. The way Graves had looked standing in the doorway when she found her mother. The way he'd stepped back and let the door close, because some things were private and he understood that, had always understood that, had done all of this understanding completely what it was going to cost him and what it wasn't going to give him back. She'd asked him once, in the 3 weeks since, what he was going to do after everything was done. After the federal case found its shape, after Naomi's testimony was formally entered, after whatever came next, he'd said, "I'm going to see my son." She'd said, "What's his name?" He'd said, "Danny." She'd thought about that for a second. "Is he going to be glad to see you?" Graves had been quiet for a long moment, looking at the desert. "I think so," he'd said. "I think he's been waiting a while." "Tell him he's not allowed to be mad," Lila had said. "You were busy." Graves had looked at her then with the expression he sometimes had, the one that wasn't quite a smile and was also completely a smile, and he'd said, "I'll pass that along." She hadn't asked anything else. She understood that some things you couldn't explain forward, only backward, only from the other side of the doing of them. She was 8 years old, and she understood this because her mother had taught her, and her mother had learned it the hard way, and the hard way was the only way some things got taught. The sun cleared the last cloud, and the compound filled with golden light, and the motorcycles stood in the yard casting long shadows, and from inside came the smell of coffee and the sound of men being, in their imperfect and complicated and entirely committed way, exactly what they had decided to be. Lila Rowan held Mr. Buttons against her chest and felt the cold air on her face and watched the light move across the desert and didn't look away from any of it, not from the beauty of it, not from the cost of it. Both were true. Both were hers. She stayed on the steps until the last of the light was gone and the stars came out over Nevada, indifferent and numerous and permanent, and then she stood up and tucked Mr. Buttons under her arm and went inside where it was warm. The door closed behind her. The desert settled into its night quiet, and the motorcycles stood in the yard under the stars, patient and still, waiting for whatever morning asked of them next.